everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome back to our webinar series for the Bridge to Land, Water, Sky Living Lab project. My name is Megan. I'm on the Bridge Communications team, and as usual, I will be your host for today's webinar. Okay. So a quick protocol. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to the Bridge to Land, Water, Sky YouTube channel after the webinar. You can see that by the end of this week, probably we'll have that up. There are closed captions available on your toolbar, and you can feel free to enter any questions into the Q&A or in the chat at any point throughout the webinar, but the question and answer period will be at the end, and we will, we'll have those just at the end of the presentation. So in today's webinar, the mechanisms of intercropping, how mixing crops can cut inputs and boost yields, Warren McAuley will talk about plant growth characteristics, how insects look for plants to eat, how diseases are spread between plants, and more to better understand why intercropping different plants can be useful in reducing inputs and increasing crop yield. Warren McAuley, I hope I'm saying that last name right, started with Nature United in April 2025. He works with producers, researchers, agrologists, and industry partners on the adoption of Nature United's strategy for nature climate solutions across the Canadian prairies. He provides technical expertise within the conservation agriculture space, including for soil health and cropping strategies, relationship development between key stakeholders, along with helping producers see the relationship they have with their land is his key role. Warren's start in natural agriculture systems began while volunteering in Madagascar and seeing the impact that using nature-based solutions can have on smallholder farmers. Before Nature United, Warren worked in chemical efficiency, if I'm just going to continue, and breeding research, as well as working with a systems research program at the University of Saskatchewan, focused in nature-based solutions. He completed his Master of Science in Soil Science in 2023, working in soil health and intercropping. I think that's it for me. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Warren.
Thanks. Sorry, I should have cut down that the length of that. That was way too long.
No, that's okay. Very interesting. So I'm happy to share it.
Perfect. So, hello everyone. My name is Warren McAuley, and today I'm going to be presenting on the mechanisms of intercropping. I am the Prairies Agriculture Program Manager for Nature United, and you might be wondering why Nature United is presenting on intercropping. And so part of my role with Nature United is to help farmers try new practices, help enable research in sustainable practices, and help to train agronomists in soil health and sustainable practices. So that's how it all fits in. Nature United is a conservation organization who is helping to increase sustainable ag practices across Canada. So I'm excited to be here to present on intercropping and hopefully a new way, and not really a prescriptive way, but taking a step back and understanding what's actually happening within an intercrop to be able to better know how to put intercrops together. I'd also like to thank the Bridge to Land, Water, Sky for inviting me to give this presentation, and I'm happy to be giving this from Treaty 6 territory. A lot of this presentation, as I was reflecting on it, actually goes back to a more natural way of plant interactions and farming, and I really think that the Indigenous communities are more aware of this. So I'm really happy to be able to contribute and to give back to the people who have stewarded the land for so long. So hopping into the presentation here, when we think about agriculture and the prairies, two different pictures kind of come up. We have our natural prairie system here, and we have our agricultural system here, or at least what AI determined was a natural agricultural system. So on the right-hand side with that farmer, we have one crop grown. We have some inputs happening there. Apparently we have an auto steer John Deere tractor. And then on the left-hand side, we see multiple species, different grasses being grown, maybe some perennials in there, some annuals. We have some broadleaf, some pockets of trees. And so each of those plants is going to be growing where there is a niche for it to grow rather than in a conventional agricultural system that is trying to fit the same plant into all niches. So just moving into that, on from that, some intercropping on the prairies, some information about it. Even though our prairies were developed to have multiple species within the same space, in 2020 in Saskatchewan, there's about 16,000 hectares intercropped. And considering there are just over 16 million hectares of cropland in Saskatchewan, that's about 0.1% or about one field out of every 1,000 fields intercropped. So there are some more common intercropping mixes like pea canola, chickpea flax, and lentil wheat. And I know there's a lot of researchers who give good information on that. Um, that's not what I'm going to be talking about, though. I'm going to be looking at more of why plants and how plants work together. And so, for the purpose of this presentation, intercropping is going to be growing two or more plants in the same field at the same time for purposes of harvesting the grains, seeds, and pulses off them. And so that differs from cover cropping, as cover cropping is more intended for soil health. Maybe you're growing something in the understory of your grain crop where you're not looking at harvesting that thing. Intercropping is growing multiple plants to harvest the seeds and the grains off all of those. Although intercropping and cover cropping follow many of the same concepts. So intercropping can take many forms. It really depends on the farmer's setup, machinery availability, climate, varieties, and cropping objectives. So first we'll jump into what cover cropping can look like. This is the simplest of all of them. It's just a straight mixed intercrop. And so there's a random mixture of two or more crops, and there's no specific planting pattern. So this would be if you're just going out and broadcasting seed, you could intercrop that way. And the purpose of the intercrop, and we'll get into this a lot more in detail in later parts of the presentation, is to have crops that are complementing each other. So for example, in this, you have the corn that's growing tall using some of the upper canopy, and you have the broadleaves growing down farther and covering the soil, maybe reducing water evaporation. But like I said, we'll get into that. So mixed intercropping is our simplest type of intercropping. Next, we'll move into row intercropping, and there are actually two different types of row. So you can have a mixed row where all the seeds are mixed together and the plants come up randomly within a row. And then you can have alternating row, which this is a picture of. So we see that in rows 1 and 3, there's corn growing, and in rows 2 and 4, there's climbing beans. And so in this example, the corn's going to be growing and providing a lattice for the beans to grow up. And in return, the beans are going to be providing nitrogen for the corn. This allows, in certain circumstances, allows for separate harvesting. So you could go over top, harvest the corn off if your beans weren't totally up there, or if you had a ground bean. And then you're able to come back later and harvest closer to the ground. Relay intercropping is another type of row intercropping. And so this is more so when you have two or more species grown on the same plot of land, but only part of the growth cycle is overlapping. So within this, obviously, we can see that the wheat is ready for harvest. The soybeans are not ready for harvest. So you would come in with the combine, nip off the heads of the wheat, and then allow the soybeans to grow through. And so this can be done either just having different maturity dates on your plants, or you can have multiple seeding passes planting into an established crop. Next, we'll look at strip intercropping, and this is one that I've never seen in life in Saskatchewan here, but it's when you're growing single blocks, but putting them in strips in your field. So each block behaves like a monocrop, but you're able to get some of the benefits of intercropping. And so we can see in this picture, there's maize, soybean, and oat. So each of them is going to act like a monocrop in its own strip, but then maybe you'll get some of the benefits of, say, blocking diseases or insects. And lastly, this is one very rarely seen on the prairies here, is agroforestry. And so you're using your woody perennials along with annual or perennial crops. This can include you can incorporate livestock into these systems. And so your woody component can provide fruit, nuts, or wood, as well as other plant services such as shade or water conservation, maybe blocking the wind, as we see with our shelter belts. And maybe that's the best way that we see it. Although I have seen a field like this near the U.S. border in southern Saskatchewan that has had some rows of bushes planted in it and to protect the crop from the wind. So getting into the meat of the presentation, here is a long list of mechanisms that interact with the plants, or the plants use these to determine how intercropping works. And I like how Malzua put this together in more of a web. So each spoke of this web, or each is moving into the multi-species system in the middle, and is really contributing its own unique and different way to determine how a multi-species system works. So we're going to work through some of these in the next part of the presentation here, just to determine or to understand better how species work together and how a lot of these factors come into play. First, we're going to look at two different concepts, complementation and competition. And so obviously in an intercrop, all things being equal, we want as much complementation as possible. And so complementation in theory is when you have species with different growth patterns and physiology, accessing resources at different times and in different places, or in different spaces within the soil and above ground. And so this can be easily shifted into competition if you have some of those growth patterns lining up. So if you have two root systems that are in the same physical space or next to each other at the same time, you're going to start having some competition. So understanding how complementation works and trying to shift some of those factors or shift those growth cycles out of sync with each other is one way to make an intercrop work a little bit better. On the other hand, with competition, often we think of competition as strictly a negative thing. In conventional agriculture, we'll look at monocrops and say we need these to compete with our weeds, to keep the weeds down. Totally true. But competition can also be a benefit. So we can benefit species within an intercrop by gathering additional resources. So if there's a lot of resources available and a plant senses that another plant is taking up resources, or those resources are dwindling, then there's the potential for that plant to take up additional resources and be able to use those. Or if there's a scarcity, that plant might be able to be more efficient in its use of a given resource. So for example, if there's starting to be dried on water, that plant can take action to be able to be more efficient in its water use. And again, like I talked about before, resource competition can be avoided in different planes, time and space. So within the time, this is more so management because we can look at things like planting dates, germination time, flowering times, kind of the nutrition and the water needs during specific life cycles, and also days to maturity. More so on the plant side, there's growth habits. So you have your tall and your short plants, your horizontal and vertical plants, your deep and shallow roots, and then your root hair sizes. So keeping in mind kind of competition and complementation, and keeping in mind the time and the space that plants exist, we move into a picture like this. And I like this picture because it proves that you can use Microsoft Paint to be able to get something published in a journal, but also it combines all of the factors that we're going to look at, all the resources, into one graphic. But boiling this down and simplifying it, in agriculture and plants, we have three main resources. So we have light, we have nutrients, and we have water, and all plants need these to grow. And when we think about the different parts of plants, we can separate it in two, kind of the above ground and the below ground. So obviously our above ground biomass is responsible mainly for light and for photosynthesis and gathering that light. but it also has some impact on nutrients and water because the leaves of a plant can absorb nutrients if you're doing a foliar spray and can absorb water in rainfall or irrigation. When we're thinking of roots, we're thinking of your below ground structures, and those are responsible more so for your nutrients and your water and not for your light at all, which I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone on this call. But as we look at light, nutrient, and water, we'll think of shoots for light and roots for nutrient and water. So plants have different physical strategies for obtaining light. So if we look outside, not right now, it just finished snowing in Saskatoon, but during a summer day and you look at your, your lawn, you're going to see your grasses growing more vertically. And that's common throughout all grasses, your wheat, your corn. They have a very vertical leaf arrangement, whereas your broadleaves have leaves that are horizontal. And even when we think of positions of the sun throughout the day, we can think of when these plants are best able to get the resources that it needs. For example, in the morning, when the rays are coming along horizontally and we have a plant with vertical leaf arrangement like a grass, that plant is able to gather that light more so than something with a horizontal leaf arrangement. If you only had one species in this, the species really isn't able to gather light throughout the day at an equal rate. They're all kind of competing during the same time in the day. Where having an intercrop or multiple species within a field, you're able to spread that light harvesting out throughout the day. So in this case, if we get to midday and the sun's directly above us, plants with horizontal leaves are able to gather that sunlight better than those plants with vertical leaves. So if we look at an example back to our mixed monocrop, and we have our corn having vertical leaves, they're able to collect sunlight during the day, or sorry, in the morning. And then our plants, our squash or our pumpkins with our horizontal leaf arrangement has a better ability to collect that midday. So that's light, very simple concept, but probably something we just don't think about. And we'll move on to roots now. And similarly with leaves, roots have two main rooting strategies. Plants have two main rooting strategies. So there's a fibrous root system and there's a taproot. So in a fibrous root system, there's many branched roots. And in a taproot, there's a single main root with few secondary offshoots. And so when we think about our nutrient and our water use, we have to think of how the roots look and how they perform. And so we can think about the area of roots, the size of the primary and secondary roots, number of roots, the speed of the root growth. So again, we're looking at our area of our roots or our spatialness ability of our roots, and also the time that the roots get into a space. There's a potential for root exudates to impact what nutrients are uptaken by a plant. Interaction with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So that's fungi that lives in the soil and can inhabit the roots and actually extend the rooting zone. And there's more. So this is just a brief overview of how roots can impact what's brought up. So moving into our thoughts about competition and complementation. Obviously, if we have two plants growing separately like this, there's not going to be that much competition. There's no overlap with the roots. Maybe there might be a little bit of shading, some light competition, but overall, they're living separately and harmoniously. But when plants get closer, that's when competition comes in. So they're occupying the same time, the same space at the same time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that competition is the only thing that's happening there. So in soil nutrient use, there's a concept called nutrient scavenging. And so that's some plants are able to gather nutrients better than others. So for example, legumes have the ability to solubilize phosphorus in the soil. So legumes actually acidify the rooting zone, and that enables phosphorus to be able to be transformed into a plant uptake, a variety of phosphorus that's more available to be uptaken by plants. And if there are other roots within that rooting zone of the legumes, they can benefit from this as well. Similarly, if you have a deep-rooted plant, they're often able to bring up calcium, phosphorus, and potassium from deeper in the soil profile and either shed these through root exudates, or when the plant dies, then you have a greater concentration of some of those nutrients located farther up in the soil profile. There can also be a nutrient transfer between plants. And so we'll go on and pick on our legumes again. So they can fix nitrogen, obviously, but they can share that nitrogen for uptake for other plants. And they don't do this holistically, but they just have a leaky system. So a legume can fix nitrogen in their rhizobia, and then that rhizobia will leak off some of that nitrogen into the rooting zone. And if there's a complementary plant that has its roots there at the same time, that plant can uptake nitrogen. And there's this study that was published this year in 2026 that shows that up to 78% of a non-legume's nitrogen uptake within an intercrop can be derived from the legume. There can also be enhanced arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi colonization in different plant roots. So we see that if you have one plant that is really encouraging of the AMF and another that's less so, that AMF can still inhabit or be drawn towards that colonized plant and be able to extend that rooting zone and bring nutrients and resources into the rooting zone that would not be available otherwise. And we also know that plants have different nutritional needs and different times that they need this. So if you're having complementary plants within the rooting zone, they're gathering nutrients kind of in their own pace at their own time, and they're able to take advantage of the whole buffet rather than just having everyone competing for a single nutrient at the same time. I have this list of water use mechanics as well. And so, yeah, we've looked at light, we've looked at nutrients, and now into water. And that's simply to reiterate what I said with the nutrients. And there's some roots that can access water held in smaller pores. So depending on the size of the roots, water can be used more efficiently. Some crops need more water. When we look at our rooting strategies, obviously our deeper taproot is able to go deeper and gather water from lower in the soil profile. We can also have an increased canopy cover with different leaf strategies that ensures less evaporations, and overall just understanding that plants are using water in a different way. And if we can find ways that the water use isn't synced up, then that your intercrop will be able to benefit. So that's kind of like the first chunk of the mechanisms of how intercrop plants interact with each other. So we've gone over our growth characteristics with our shoots and our roots. And really, again, we'll think about the space that they occupy and the time that they occupy them. And then we also have our light, our nutrient, and our water use. And we think about our competition and our complementation with that, and then also the amount of the nutrients used, whether they need more than an intercrop or their companion intercrop species. So those were all kind of the plant-on-plant factors. So now we'll look at some of the external forces that we have on plants. And so I really enjoy this saying, nature abhors a vacuum. And so that means that empty spaces or gaps are quickly filled by something, reflecting a natural tendency for balance and completeness. So in nature, if there's a lack of something growing in a space, it's going to fill that. And we have a term for that, weeds. We know that weeds are really good at growing in areas that the crops aren't growing. They like to fill in space. So when we think about maybe a hilltop that's eroded a little bit, we can see in this picture, we have our canola happily growing kind of in the depression on the side of the slope. And at the top, the canola is not growing. What's going to fill in there? Weeds. That's because weeds fill a niche, and they look to protect the soil. So weeds fill a niche by drawing nutrients from deeper in the soil profile. So I mentioned that with some of our tap-rooted crops, weeds also fill some of those roles. Um, and then they protect the soil. So they can live in those inhospitable landscapes, those areas that are waterlogged, saline, maybe they're dry, too dry for the crop. And they're also the first plants in after a disturbance. And so I actually ran across this infographic on LinkedIn last week when I was putting this presentation together. And the theory behind this infographic is that using weeds, you can repair parts of your soil. So for example, with dandelion, it has that taproot and it actually draws calcium up. So dandelion grows in compacted soils. It brings calcium up, and that calcium helps to provide structure for the soil and enhance that soil structure. So the theory behind this was using your weeds to tell you what your soil needs. Similar with clover, the clover fixes nitrogen, so maybe that's found in a nitrogen deficient soil. I mean, if anyone can tell me what purslane or portulaca does, my garden is full of it, so I would appreciate that. I didn't read far enough apparently to understand what the benefit of that is. But when we think about having intercrops, so if we look at a monocrop and we have a weed growing in the area, that weed is fulfilling a need. So the theory is that within an intercrop, we can actually use the second component of an intercrop or part of the intercrop to be able to fill that need instead. And so that's backed up by some research. In this 2005 study, there was a wheat canola and a wheat canola pea intercrop, and they showed that there was weed suppression compared to a monocrop. And so that would be because one part of the intercrop is able to compete with the weeds for the resources that the weeds are using and able to fill that ecological niche. So if we think back to nature abhors a vacuum, instead of having a monocrop where there's going to be vacuums filled by weeds, we're having an intercrop where there's no vacuums because the intercrop is filling out different areas, different ecological niches. Similarly, and I like this one because it's a little bit more specific, in this pea barley intercrop, there was excess inorganic nitrogen, so maybe some nitrates, and the barley was able to outcompete the weeds. So we know that the niche in this area, there was excess nitrogen. The barley was able to fill that. Whereas if you only had pea planted in this field, that pea is not going to compete for nitrogen because generally it's fixing its own. So going back to our infographic here, instead of having some scraggly canola on the top of a hill slope, if we had planted this to a pea canola intercrop, then maybe the peas would be taking advantage of some of that drier soil at the top of the slope and being able to grow there rather than having weeds colonize that area and fill that void. Next, we'll look at insects. And so first, it's important to know how insects find plants. And so I had to dig back into a book published in 1951. I actually found it at the University of Saskatchewan Library, so I went and dusted that book off. But it said that insects find plants through smell, sight, maybe some mechanical stimuli. So it likes the shape of the plant or the way that the plant feels. And there can also, all things being equal, be a plant preference. So if you have a generalist insect, it's going to go to the plant that it prefers. And that kind of flows into this really complicated graph this picture showing the plant factors, the environmental factors, and the insect factors. But really, it can be simplified down into 4 ways that diverse species mixes impacts the insects and diseases ability to find a host plant. So when we're looking at a monocrop versus an intercrop or a mixed crop, a mixed species crop, the first one is the dilution effect. So picture yourself as an insect. You're standing at the crossroads of 2 fields. In one field, you see the thing you love to eat, in this case, peas. In another field, you're trying to make out, and you have to remember insects see things differently. There's different signals. Maybe you're trying to smell this out. You smell some peas, but you also smell or get a different wavelength of light off the barley that's growing here too. Your interest would be going towards the pea monocrop. So you're going to be drawn towards that because it is you would eat all of those rather than having to hunt and search through an intercrop. So this is going to keep a parasitic insect away. And when I'm talking about insect in this area, I'm talking about those that are looking at eating the plants, not your beneficials. So in our second case here, we have a physical barrier effect. And so that's more so with diseases, as diseases are transported by wind, water, and rain. But this can also impact an insect search for plants as well. So if we look at the picture here, if we have a disease on our peas and it's bouncing happily along, the wind's blowing it along pea plant to pea plant, all of a sudden it reaches a physical barrier, that corn plant, which is not susceptible to that disease. So that disease just stops. It can't reach those pea plants that are beyond that. I mean, so you would have more localized areas of diseases rather than having a disease spread rampantly throughout a field. This can also impact an insect's visual search as well. As stated in that 1992 study, if you have a conventional cereal crop or a cereal crop, it actually hides some of the smaller crops down below so the insects can't find it. So that's our dilution and our physical barrier. Third, we'll look at habitat. And so this is contrasting plant architecture creates a new habitat. So this one was very simple. They grew a row of sunflowers and that attracted birds, and those birds started eating some of the insects. So creating new habitats for predators to be able to prey on some of the negative insects that you're dealing with within your crop. And lastly, plants can emit substances that have negative effects on pests and diseases. There's a study here with root nematodes that are little worms in the soil that eat plant roots. So if you had a plant that emitted a chemical effect and kept the nematodes away, then you're also going to be shielding some of your intercrop plants that are grown within the same area. This can work on the opposite, though. You can have plants that stop seeds from germinating, except plants of their own variety. So we do have to be aware that this can create some competition within different species mixes as well. So these three concepts or four concepts as a whole are backed up through some studies here. So in this 1991 study, they did a meta-analysis of 209 crop mixtures. There were 287 parasitic insects that were recorded, and there were fewer insects in 52% of those intercrops, which if you can think and you're planning on going out and spraying, if you could spray half the time that you currently have to spray, that's a great savings for your inputs, for your machinery time, for your labor. Similarly with diseases, and this one was even greater, in 73% of intercropping studies, there was reduced diseases. And that was commonly 30 to 40%, but up to 80% in some systems. So again, instead of having to go out and spray your crop, having an intercrop has been shown to be able to reduce some of those disease and pest pressures. The last part here, we'll jump into how do we measure an intercrop. And first we'll look at yield, because yields can get a little bit complicated, because generally in an intercrop, you're going to have less bushels per acre than you would in a monocrop, because you're having multiple plants compete for the same species or the same resources, I should say. And so they developed a ratio called the land equivalency ratio. And that's simply taking the intercrop yield and dividing by the monocrop yield. So I put together two examples for you. So if we have a pea monocrop, that's 53 bushels an acre. We have a canola monocrop, that's 40 bushels an acre. And then we have a pea canola intercrop. So for this example, the pea yielded 30 bushels an acre and the canola yielded 20 bushels an acre. So simply we take our 30 bushels an acre pea intercrop yields and we divide that into the monocrop yields and we get a number. Similarly, we do that for canola, we get a number, and then we add that number together. And this number shows the efficiency that the field was used. And so if we have a number greater than 1, that means that the field was used more efficiently than a monocrop was. And so in this example, this field was used 6.6% more efficient than if it was cropped with either pea or canola. For the second example here, the pea yield dropped, the canola yield went up, but we do the same. We take the 15 of the intercrop and we divide it into the 53 of the monocrop. We take the 25 of the intercrop and we divide it into the 40 of the monocrop, and we divide that, and we see this one's actually under yielding. So we're not using the field as efficiently as a monocrop does. So this is an important metric to know to see how plants work together and whether they're actually competing with each other or if there's some complementary action happening within an intercrop. There are other things to think about, income stability, labor productivity. We can look at increased habitat, soil benefits, reducing your inputs, your pesticides and your fertilizer, or just having a more natural system. And that's all to say, not all intercrop mixtures are beneficial. Some are too complex. Some have too many inputs. There's too much labor, too competitive, maybe not enough inputs. Maybe you're growing two things that aren't compatible with something you're trying to spray on them. And so that really comes back to our web here, where you have your multi-species impacted by your soil and your nutrients and your biodiversity and your productivity. So it really is a complex system. And so here are some thoughts if you're looking at building an intercrop. Step one is to determine what goal you have. So your goal can be maximize yields. You can try to drain down or use water in a field. Maybe you're trying to fix some nitrogen. Your intercrop isn't going to do all of these. So it would be best to pick one or two goals out of this to determine what's the best intercrop you can use. Second, pick some plants that are going to accomplish your goals, but then consider these plant characteristics. So kind of this entire presentation, you need to look at what are your roots and shoot characteristics, what nutrients are your plants going to need, your water use, your pesticides, harvest timing, seed separation, marketing, costs. So there's a lot of stuff to consider when looking at an intercrop. If you're interested in starting out, use simple mixes. Keep your acres small to begin with. Talk with people who have tried it to see their experience. There are people in Saskatchewan who have done this, and I know a lot of them are happy to talk about their experience and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And know that you won't hit a home run with every swing. Know that failing has learning opportunities, and that as you try this out and as you take into consideration the competition and complementary action, as you're looking at your shoots and your roots and how those can work together, I think that there are some good intercrops that we haven't discovered yet, and I think they would be really able to be accepted within the prairies here. So thank you so much. That's my presentation, and I will open the floor, I think pass it back to Megan, but then we have a time of questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I definitely learned a lot. So we do have one more survey okay, it's here on the screen. So you can get to that through the QR code. I'm also going to send, okay, I just sent it in the chat. So there's a link as well to access that survey. It's a little bit similar to what you filled out when registering, but just a few more questions. And those insights are really helpful to us as well. So we really appreciate you filling that out for us. And then after that, we'll just give you about a minute to fill out that survey, and then we will get into some questions. There are a few here. Let me go to the Q&A. Okay, we definitely, yeah, nice. All right. I think I'll just get into the first question here. And you might have gone over some of these things, like these questions were coming in throughout. So yeah, you might
Sure
have gone
thing.
over some of it, but if you want to add anything. So Rick is asking something I've never thought of. Does AMF associate more readily with some crops over others, such as cereals versus broadleaf?
I don't think it's really separated between cereals and broadleaves. We know that canola doesn't really have many AMF interactions, but even if you're thinking in a larger system of keeping your arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi alive, maybe planting something that allows it to inhabit those root systems is good throughout the year. So if you have canola and you want to throw some peas in there, that keeps your AMF alive. And allows it to propagate even farther next season rather than having it completely stop growing and have to restart after you've done your canola crop. I know that wasn't really an answer, Rick. I'm sorry, but there are you would have to be pretty specific. There's no general paintbrush to paint whether it prefers grasses or broadleaves.
Yeah, that's totally fair. We have a question from Lydia. Where could someone go to find more information about which crops work well together for specific soil/moisture zones? Is there anything specific that should be considered before incorporating cover crop/intercrops into existing rotations?
Yeah, there is a lot to consider. We'll start with the second half of the question first. So I actually had a slide here that I didn't show. I took it from Derek Axton, who does a lot of intercropping in southern Saskatchewan, and he has a whole list of ways that they've screwed up their intercrop. And it was anything from forgetting what they previously sprayed on a field, not considering what they need to spray, different nutrients that were needed, water, all sorts. So there is, yeah, I think it's best. There are some pretty tried out ones, and that was your pea canola seems to be pretty popular, chickpea flax and lentil wheat. So those are great starting points, and from there maybe you can start tweaking and understanding what works better in your system as you get down some of those that have already been developed. Um, a place that you can go for more is there could someone go to find more information which crops work well together in a specific soil? So I guess out of those three mixes, maybe if you're kind of looking what works well in your area already, obviously lentils don't work too far up in the northern parts of the province. So if you're in lentil growing area, maybe you can think about throwing some wheat in there and seeing what that looks like. So maybe just looking at the individual portions of an intercrop and making sure that those will grow in your area first before trying to put them in there.
Nice. There's another question from Rick that I don't want to forget. He's asking also, do you know of any intercrop examples that are applied in a traditional potato sugar beet root crop? Could be helpful from a fertility and pest/disease perspective?
Yes, I do. Do I remember them right now? No. Rick, I can get you that information. I actually read pretty recently about some cover cropping in potatoes. Potatoes is a little bit more difficult, or maybe it's easier because it does have such different growth cycles or growth strategies than a lot of our grain crops. So it might be easier to intercrop within a potato because you can harvest separately and not have to um, worry about separating afterwards. So Rick, I can be in contact with that.
We do, just for everyone, in case you're not looking at the chat, we do have a few links that someone shared as well. Cover crops, forage you pick. So if you want to check those out. Going back to our questions, we have one here from Naveen. Very insightful, thank you. I joined the webinar a little late and not sure if you have covered this in your previous slides or not. I have a question regarding the crop rotations for the intercropping fields. I have noticed producers using the same intercrop year after year in same areas. What potential impacts it could have on the soil and biodiversity of weeds, insects, or other pests?
Yeah, I think you'll run into a similar problem that if you're growing the same monocrop year after year, and maybe it'll be diluted a little bit because you're having multiple species. But if you're having a canola pea intercrop and you start getting clubroot and you're providing a host for that year after year, that clubroot's going to remain in your field. That makes a lot of sense. And so even within this, you still do need to have some rotation and knowing that if you have a buildup of pests, that your intercrop, and if you're providing a host or a plant that the insects are going to eat every year, those insects are going to stick around and it'll build the population. So it is also important to understand that you need to rotate through and be having some breaks within your intercrops as well.
Nice. All right. Does Nature United have any intercropping demonstrations in Saskatchewan that people can visit during the growing season?
Absolutely. Thanks, Maddie. That seems like a planted question. So, as part of my role with Nature United, we have a model farm network. And so, the purpose of this network is to have groups of 10 farmers try 3 new practices over 5 years. And so, our first model farm network was established in Melfort last year. We have our second one in Manitoba starting up this year. And so the main field, and we'll be having a field day for each of those. Um, you can be in contact with me about information about that, but that's scheduled for August 12th in Melfort, right outside. And so we'll be showing a proof of concept field, showing some intercrops, some cover crops, and then some other things that are kind of outside my purview, but that the producer really wanted to try out. So including restoring shelter belts, putting an apiary in the field. So it's a really interesting tour, and it's a really good way also. One of the things that I really stress with my job is it's really hard to do this alone. And so we love trying to connect people within regional areas to make sure that you have a group of other producers who are wanting to try this because it's easier to go together. Like if you're the only one who's trying this in an area, make sure you're finding that community support. And yeah, that's really going to be helpful with some of your questions and being able to have kind of those boots on the field. I unfortunately do not farm. I come at this from a program and a theoretical point of view. But I know if I was farming and trying this stuff out, I would love to have a community surrounding me of people I can bounce ideas off of. So come out to the field day in Melfort on August 12th. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to contact me.
Nice. And I think we have one more question here. Do you have insight on pea and camelina intercrop?
No. I don't. I could see it really being interesting. And again, that's kind of where it goes back to my presentation about starting small. Put it on a small amount of acres, see how it interacts, consider the rooting strategies, consider the leaf strategies, and trying to figure out whether those plants are going to be competing too much or whether they're going to have some complementary action.
Nice. Still a good answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, okay, I'm not seeing, I'll just double check the chat really quick. Great. I think that's all for questions for now. You can always, I think we have it on the screen here, but you can always reach out to the Bridge to Land Water Sky if you do have any other questions for Warren. Also, you can contact him. I'm guessing Nature United's website. Your contact info is on there.
It's not
No.
actually, but
Okay. Well, you can reach out to Bridge and we can get you in contact
yeah,
with Warren if you have any other questions that way. And I'm sure on their social media pages, they'll have the tour coming up as well.
yeah.
Oh, there we go.
And I'm
And then he
just put
just
my
added
email
it.
in the chat if you need to copy that. So
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, well, I think that's everything for today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined. If you did join late, again, we will have the recording of this up on our YouTube page, Bridge to Land Water Sky. And thank you, Warren. That was an amazing presentation. We really appreciate you taking some time out. And yeah, I think that's it. All right. Have a great day, everybody.